The first thing Marten Hartwell noticed was the sound of metal tearing itself apart. The chartered medevac flight had been flying low through the night over the Northwest Territories, cutting across a frozen landscape that stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. Snow clouds hid the moon and blurred the horizon, turning everything outside the cockpit windows into a shifting wall of white. Hartwell, a 42-year-old bush pilot with years of experience flying through Arctic winter, tried to keep the aircraft level as turbulence pushed at the wings. Behind him sat a nurse, a pregnant Inuit woman, and a teenage Inuit boy named David Pisurayak Kutuk. They were headed from Cambridge Bay to Yellowknife for medical care. The radio hissed with static. Then the altimeter dropped faster than it should have. A moment later, the right wing clipped something. Ice, rock, he couldn't tell, and the aircraft slammed into the frozen ground. The impact threw Hartwell forward so hard his legs snapped instantly beneath him. Pain tore through his body, and by the time the aircraft stopped moving, one engine had broken free, and snow was blowing straight into the shattered fuselage. The nurse had died in the crash. The pregnant woman was gravely injured and barely conscious. David, the teenage passenger, was alive but shaken, and he dropped to his knees in the wreckage, calling out for help that wasn't coming. The cabin temperature plummeted. Hartwell forced himself to drag his broken leg away from the twisted metal, fighting nausea as he tried to understand what had happened. The aircraft hadn't burned. That was the only small mercy. The cold settled in immediately. Hartwell estimated it was at least 30 degrees below zero. Wind howled against the broken shell of the plane and pulled heat from their bodies in minutes. He tried the radio. Nothing. The antenna had sheared off in the crash. They were somewhere in the vast Arctic wilderness, far from any settlement, with no working navigation equipment and no way to send a distress call. If they wanted to survive, they would have to do it alone. David acted first. While Hartwell drifted in and out of consciousness from the pain in his leg, the teenager searched the wreckage for anything useful: blankets, scraps of insulation, broken pieces of seat cushions. He helped Hartwell roll onto a makeshift bed of fabric and metal, improvising shelter inside what was left of the fuselage. The pregnant woman moaned softly through the night, fading slowly as the temperature continued to drop. By morning, she was gone. Now only Hartwell and David remained alive in the silent Arctic. The days that followed blurred into a cycle of pain, cold, and the unending struggle to stay alive. Hartwell could not move far. His leg had shattered in multiple places, leaving him barely able to shift his weight. David kept watch for rescue planes, built small fires from scraps of wood and fabric, and tried to melt snow in a tin can they found in the wreckage. They rationed the tiny amount of food on board, knowing it wouldn't last more than a few days. Search aircraft roared overhead occasionally, but always too far away, never close enough to see the thin smoke drifting from the crash site. On the 9th day, starvation became impossible to ignore. Their bodies shook violently from the cold, and Hartwell felt himself slipping into long stretches of confusion. David tried to forage outside the wreck, but there was nothing except ice and snow. No vegetation, no animals, no tracks. Just an endless white expanse and the growing certainty that help might not reach them in time. The teenager kept building fires, gathering small broken pieces of the aircraft, anything that would burn long enough to warm them for a moment. Hartwell could see frost forming on David's eyelashes as he worked, refusing to stop even when the wind drove snow across the wreckage like knives. The boy's determination kept them alive longer than Hartwell thought possible, but the cold was relentless. After more than 2 weeks, David's strength weakened. His fingers had turned stiff and pale, and he stumbled when he tried to move through the snow. Hartwell watched him sit near the opening of the fuselage, head bowed, and knew something had changed. When the fire died that night, David did not get up to rebuild it. Sometime before dawn, he slipped away quietly, leaving Hartwell alone in the frozen wreck. For several hours, Hartwell didn't know if he would survive long enough to be found. The cold worked its way through every layer of makeshift bedding, sinking into his bones. He stopped feeling his toes. He drifted in and out of sleep, waking each time with the same pounding thought: keep breathing. He tried to think about his family, about warm rooms and summer days, anything that wasn't the overwhelming cold inside that broken aircraft. As the days passed, he ran out of food completely. Desperation pushed him toward a decision that haunted him long after he was rescued. With no other way to survive, he used a small piece of metal to take flesh from one of the deceased passengers. It was a choice made at the edge of death, in a place where the human body demands what the human mind cannot bear. He would later recount it with shame, but he also admitted he would not have lived without it. Snow buried the aircraft deeper. Hartwell dug himself out repeatedly, convinced each time he wouldn't have the strength to do it again. He listened constantly for the distant drone of engines, for anything that might mean rescue was near. He saw nothing but snowstorms and white sky. 30 days passed this way, then 31. On the 32nd day, a faint hum reached him from far away. He wasn't sure if he imagined it. The sound grew louder. When the shadow of a search aircraft swept across the snow, he tried to wave a piece of fabric, but his arm barely moved. The plane circled. It came back. The search team had finally spotted the wreckage. Rescuers approached cautiously, expecting to find bodies. Instead, they found Hartwell curled beneath layers of torn blankets and insulation, barely conscious, but still breathing. They lifted him into a stretcher, shielded him from the wind, and carried him toward the helicopter that had landed nearby. When the cabin heat hit his skin, he began shaking uncontrollably. He had lost nearly 40 pounds. Frostbite had taken parts of his extremities. Doctors later said he had survived against all medical expectations, held together only by raw determination and the will to keep breathing one more hour at a time. In the weeks that followed, investigators pieced together the crash timeline, the search efforts, and the incredible endurance that had kept Hartwell alive. They recognized David Pisurayak Kutuk's bravery, noting that the teenager had kept Hartwell alive far longer than he could have survived on his own. The story became one of the most extraordinary survival accounts in Arctic history, marked by loss, courage, and the brutal realities of the northern wilderness. For Hartwell, survival was not a triumph, but a burden he carried for the rest of his life. But he lived, pulled back from a place where almost no one returns, surviving 31 days in the frozen isolation of the Northwest Territories. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.